What happens when you wake up and the fire that once burned in your chest now flickers out into nothing? They promised you that awakening would feel like an explosion of clarity, purpose, and power. But instead, what you found was something colder, emptier, and more honest than anything you'd felt before. You've always been sensitive, a silent rebel, a lucid seeker, the kind who saw past the surface, who questioned the script. And now you're seeing through everything. The autopilot routines, the empty conversations, the way the world moves without soul. And when your eyes finally opened, it wasn't light that overwhelmed you. It was silence, a thick silence, sacred, but uncomfortable. Like something inside of you quietly shut down. You no longer crave to win, or be seen, or prove anything to anyone. The drive to perform evaporates, and what's left behind is not peace, not yet, but a strange calm, a kind of hollow pause where the noise used to live. You feel it, don't you? That weird sense that your soul turned off one world, but hasn't yet turned on another. The body's here, but the flame, gone. Your mind tries to process, but your heart already knows. What used to move you is now dead. That old fuel just doesn't burn anymore. You're not broken. You're not failing. This is what real awakening feels like. Not the kind sold in self-help books. The real one, the death before rebirth kind. The kind that strips you of identity before giving you essence. The kind that no one warns you about because it's not glamorous. It's raw. No one tells you the hidden cost of waking up is the loss of the self you once called you. And now, without the ego, without the script, without applause, how do you move? Where do you go from here? This isn't a call to chase goals again. It's an invitation to sit with the nothing, to stare into the hollow space without fear, and slowly realize that inside that emptiness, something new is stirring, a seed. You don't know its name yet, but it's there, quiet, patient, already sprouting roots inside you. They told you that awakening would mean finding your purpose, your fire, your center. That enlightenment was a shortcut to fulfillment, as if seeing the truth would instantly make you feel alive again. But here's what they didn't say. Sometimes, truth doesn't awaken you. It deactivates you, because that fire you used to feel wasn't even yours. It belonged to the ego, a flame fed by fear, of not being enough, of not belonging, of being invisible. And when awakening dissolves that fear, the drive that once pushed you forward vanishes too. You don't crash. You simply stop, not out of laziness, not out of confusion, but because something deep within you refuses to keep moving the way it used to. What once inspired you now feels hollow. The goals you used to chase now look like costumes from someone else's play. It doesn't fit anymore. None of it. And that's when the fall begins. Not a fall into darkness, a fall inward, a quiet disintegration, as if your soul started erasing one by one the lines they gave you since childhood. Be someone, achieve more, prove your worth. But what if there's nothing left to prove? What if worth isn't earned, but remembered? That's where the limbo begins. The ego crumbles, but the self hasn't yet emerged. The old motivation dies, but the new one hasn't spoken yet, and you're left in the in-between, suspended, silent. This is the real price of awakening, not instant peace, but a full dismantling. It's like tearing down a house without knowing how to build a new one. For now, there's only debris, and no structure, no urgency, no mask to wear. You look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. The spark is gone. And what you used to call life now feels like a dim stage, drained of applause and meaning. But listen closely. This isn't failure. This is transition. It's the moment your soul begins reclaiming the body. The ego always shouted, but the soul whispers. And in the quiet, for the first time, you can finally hear its breath. It's not a command, not a duty, not a to-do list, just a breeze, a subtle nudge, barely noticeable, but undeniably real. That's when you get it. You didn't lose your motivation. You lost your mask. And what's coming next won't look anything like what came before. Because what drives you now won't come from fear. It will come from truth. It starts subtly. One morning, you don't get up with the same urgency. One night, you catch yourself staring at the ceiling, blank, as if the world outside had paused. Your friends talk about goals, travel plans, side projects, and you just listen. Not bored, just distant. As if you've already lived that life in a past version of yourself. There's a heaviness you can't name. It's not sadness, not fatigue. It's something deeper, quieter. And then the questions come. What's wrong with me? Why don't I want anything anymore? Why doesn't anything excite me? Did I break something inside? But no, you're not broken. You're just out of reference points. The old ones don't speak to you anymore. Because those dreams belong to another you. The one who used to run on noise and needing approval. What no one says about awakening is that it's not a finish line. It's demolition, not an endless stream of light, but a period of blindness. The light burns at first, and until new eyes grow, you can't see. So you walk blind, not knowing what you want, not knowing what you're here for, and the uncertainty becomes total. While the world keeps spinning with slogans like "follow your dreams" and "make it happen," you feel it. Those phrases no longer belong to you. They belong to someone still chasing a self-image. You're no longer that person. That's the deep conflict. No one prepares you for the silence after the awakening, because this silence isn't empty. It's a crater. A sacred echo repeating, "I'm not who I was, but I don't yet know who I am." Can you hold that? Can you stay right there? No identity, no path, no direction. Most can't. Most run. They numb it out. They pick up old masks, go back to the grind. Pretend it was just a phase. But you can't fake it. You've tried. And every time you do, it hollows you out even more. Your soul is done with pretending. It whispers, "Don't push me back into what no longer resonates." That's why you're tired. Not of life, but of acting. Not of the world, but of playing a role you no longer believe in. You're not lazy. You're in transformation. The old fire has died. The new one hasn't sparked yet. You're between flames, between identities, between meanings. You're the chrysalis. Not the caterpillar, not the butterfly. Just that shapeless, dissolving state that looks like nothing, but holds everything. All the new, all the real. And yes, it hurts. Because no one applauds you for pausing. No one celebrates your silence. The culture has no use for someone who isn't chasing. And so you judge yourself. You call yourself lost, useless, stuck. But you're none of those things. You're being reformed from the inside out. Jung knew this. That's why he spoke of the Nigredo, the dark stage of the soul. The phase where ego dissolves and the self begins to take shape. But that birth is blind and slow and silent, and the only thing you can do is stay. Stay inside the not knowing. Trust the process, even when you feel nothing at all. Because if you run now, if you force yourself to perform, to return to who you used to be, you betray the soul. And the soul, it never punishes. But it waits. It waits for you to finally stop, to finally listen. And when you do, it speaks. Carl Jung never romanticized awakening. He didn't sugarcoat it with pastel words or wrap it in spiritual cliches. For him, transformation wasn't a euphoric revelation. It was a brutal unraveling. The collapse of the ego wasn't the end. It was the threshold, the beginning of a much deeper journey, the path toward the self, that version of you that doesn't need validation, doesn't wear a mask, doesn't need to be seen to exist. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, not better, not more successful, not more positive, just more true. To get there, he said, you must walk through the shadow, through every part of yourself you've denied, hidden, or disowned. It's not about flying toward the light. It's about descending into your basement and lighting a single match. This is where everything familiar begins to decay, where the shallow self you once lived through falls apart. You're left in a fertile emptiness, no clear form, no certainty, just silence that stings, but cleanses. A darkness that feels endless, but prepares you. Because what used to feel like motivation now reveals itself as performance. And what you thought was depression is just your soul resting, no longer willing to lie. You're not unmotivated. You're done pretending. You can't keep feeding your energy into systems that ignore your truth. The more you try to move like the old you, the more your body refuses. This isn't burnout. It's spiritual rebellion. Jung also spoke of enantiodromia, the idea that when something reaches an extreme, it transforms into its opposite. The ego, obsessed with constant movement, collapses into stillness. The urge to win, impress, dominate, mutates into the quiet need to disappear, not to escape, but to begin again, from somewhere honest. This is where the archetype of the hermit arises. Not as a coward who hides, but as the wise one who retreats to realign. To let the chaos within reorder itself. To return not with a mask, but with essence. Sometimes, disappearing isn't weakness, it's protection, it's preparation. And the modern world, it hates this phase. It pathologizes it, tries to medicate it, rush it. Because a system built on productivity has no language for mystery, no patience for stillness. But the soul doesn't move on demand. The self doesn't emerge under pressure. It only appears when the persona finally surrenders. That's why Jung said, enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's exactly what you're doing, even if no one sees it. Even if you doubt yourself, you're awakening a part of you that's been asleep for years, maybe lifetimes. The old self has burned, the script is gone, and now you're here, waiting, listening, rebuilding, without knowing how, with nothing to prove. And that is sacred. That's not weakness, that's spiritual courage. Individuation isn't a destination, it's a living spiral, a rhythm of death and rebirth, of confusion and insight, of dissolving who you were to discover who you've always been. It's not about becoming someone new, it's about remembering who you are beneath all the noise. And yes, it's lonely, because no one can walk this path for you. There may be guides, books, signs, but the real work is yours. Sometimes, all you can do is stay still, refuse to distract, refuse to betray yourself again. Just hold yourself, without needing to understand everything. This is what Jung called symbolic living, letting your dreams speak, following the wind of your inner world, moving not from logic, but from resonance, from that deep, wordless part of you that doesn't explain, but knows, because the self never forces. It calls, and you are beginning to hear it. And then, just when you're convinced that nothing will ever move again, something shifts. Not like a firestorm, not like a thunderclap, but a subtle tremor, a breath, as if the soul was slowly exhaling for the first time after years of silence. One morning you feel like writing, or walking, or just sitting quietly, watching the trees breathe, not because you have to, but because something inside finally whispers, yes, this is the new kind of motivation. It doesn't scream, it doesn't compete, it doesn't chase outcomes. It's not born from fear, urgency, or expectation. It's soft, but rooted, gentle, but undeniable. a pulse that rises from the deepest part of you, one that no longer seeks approval or recognition, but simply wants to express what's real, what's present, what's alive. There's no rush here, no deadlines, no pressure, because the soul doesn't know time, and for the first time, you realize you don't need to either. Acting from presence isn't inaction, it's right action, at the right moment, from the right center. It's movement cleansed of need. You begin to feel something strange and sacred, a peace that doesn't depend on success, a calm that doesn't vanish when plans fail, because you no longer do to achieve. You do to honor what's moving through you, to give voice to what only you can carry into the world, not for applause, but for alignment. And that's the gift. That kind of action, that kind of energy becomes more powerful than any ambition you've ever had. You no longer need the crowd to clap. You just need that deep inner yes, that quiet congruence between who you are and how you show up. You learn to say no without guilt, to choose silence without shame, to be present in a conversation without trying to convince or perform. You begin to live from another center, one that doesn't wobble, one that doesn't need a script to be strong, one that can't be touched by the noise outside. And that center is unshakable. You don't need a perfect map, you just need a living compass, one that doesn't hang on your wall, but beats in your chest. And every time you listen to it, truly listen, the path unfolds, not because you force it, but because life recognizes truth and responds to it. That's the paradox. The less you push, the more flows. The less you strive, the more becomes clear. The less you pretend, the more you connect. Not with everyone, but with the ones who also know the silence. The ones who stayed when everything went dark. The ones who, like you, are learning to hear what's born in stillness. And from that place, you begin again, to create, to move, to offer, not to fill the void, but because the void has become the seed, and you, without even noticing, have become the soil, the channel, the bridge between the invisible and the incarnated. Motivation isn't dead, it has transformed, and you, the one who had the courage to wait, now feel it rising again, not as adrenaline, but as devotion, not as pressure, but as purpose, a sacred kind of fuel, quiet, deep, steady. It doesn't want applause, it wants truth. If you've made it this far, it's not by accident. Something inside you chose to remain, in the quiet, in the uncertainty, in that space where most people turn away. And that choice, that quiet decision to stay with yourself, is a rare form of courage, the kind no one teaches, the kind almost no one applauds. But I do, because staying without answers is a sacred act. Maybe you've been feeling strange for weeks now, like the world keeps spinning, and you've quietly stepped off the ride, like you've forgotten why you do what you do. But you haven't forgotten. You're remembering, from a deeper place, from a more ancient root that's entirely your own. And if something in this message rang true for you, if you felt, even for a moment, that someone finally gave words to the silent storm inside you, I invite you to declare it. Not for them, for you. Write it below. Let your soul hear itself through your voice. Let your truth land, fully, without shame, without edit. Comment below. I'm in the chrysalis, and I will emerge. This isn't a quote. It's a vow, a whisper from your essence to your future self. It's your soul saying, I didn't give up, I'm just waiting for my true form. And when someone else reads it, maybe in another country, maybe in their own silent night, they'll feel a little less alone. If this frequency resonates with you, subscribe. Turn on the bell, not because we chase trends here, but because we sit together in the in-between, in the chrysalis, until your wings remember their shape. Thank you for not rushing. Thank you for not escaping. Thank you for choosing to stay with yourself That is the true awakening. And remember, you don't need to hurry. You don't need to know. You only need to trust. Because when the time comes, you won't run. You'll fly.